what I tell people all the time, like, are you willing to look back on all the Christians for the past 2,000 years and go, all of you are wrong, half of you aren't even Christian, and throw that many out of the kingdom? That is a level of arrogance that I'm not comfortable with. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's something about, like, we stand on the shoulders of the men in the past, and I can disagree with a number of them, but I can also disagree with them respectfully and love the work that they've done at holding the line for the faith. One thing I have noticed, I guess, in a way, is a lot of times if it's completely elder-led, one of the things you have to be careful about is the kind of the nepotism that can happen within an elder board, where everyone kind of, well, this is what we're doing, and they kind of get all of them and their cronies kind of like elected into the authority positions and then butt everyone else out.
Welcome back to Fight for Your City podcast. If y'all want to continue to support this channel, we just hit monetization recently, so I'm going to try to put out even more content, live streams, clips, all that jazz. But in order for me to do that, I want you to continue investing into this channel. So if you would, please subscribe if you want more, like this video, and share it with a pastor who you know would learn something from this. And today I have a guest that I've been trying to bring on for a few months now, another local pastor here in the Evansville area, Pastor Will Hess. How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, bro. And I'm excited to have you on because you're also a fellow local YouTuber in the Evansville area. Yep. We are rare to find, my friend.
Yeah, it is a rare thing to find in the general ministry thing. Usually we're kind of spread out along the country, so it's kind of hard to always find other like-minded people who like to have these sorts of conversations and put yourself out there, because the internet really is a new mission field. So, and
you have a really unique concept with it too, because you've titled your YouTube channel "The Church Split."
Yep, that is a choice that I made.
In a city where we talked about playing on this show is known for church splits.
Yeah, that's the ironic thing. Now, to be fair, I started it very much in Michigan, away from here. Then I came here and come to find out every church was connected to another church through church splits. So there's some irony in that.
And it's such a niche idea. It's such a niche idea to talk about that specific element of ministry. So please, just for my curiosity, walk us through why.
So yeah, the reason why the church split started, and just so everyone knows, I don't want churches to split. That's not what the point of this show is. It's actually meant to be an ironic title. Is the church split uniting a divided body? We prefer Christian unity and all those things. So one of the things that the reason why I started it was because I was a lead pastor. My entire family moved up from Virginia to Michigan. I was the lead pastor in this church, and little did I realize that there was some factions in the church, if you will. And so over my first year there, those factions started really showing, and then it turned into an us versus them sort of situation. And the church, of course, split. And come to find out, it split the year before that and a couple years even before that. So this church has just had a continual split cycle. And when it happened, I was shocked at how vitriolic it got, how vindictive people got, how nasty it got. I found out things about other people that I don't think anyone ever knew about. I found out things about myself that I never knew about myself, apparently. And I just found out pretty quickly how poorly things can go in a church split situation.
All right. And so when you're thinking about church splits, what is the most common reason that you see churches splitting? Because I think some of us, when we think about it for theological reasons, especially stuff that's happened with the United Methodist Church and a lot of those groups. Or is it more on a local level because the church within itself does not share the same mission and vision together?
So I think there's yes and no on both of those. I mean, there's some that are obviously theological, like the Methodist splits, or the recently with Anglicans, so you see that like all just tearing at the seams. So yeah, there's sometimes very large theological reasons as to why that's happening. In fact, it's very curious to watch even the SBC right now, how they're handling some stuff, because they have kind of broadened their doctrine to such a degree. And the question is, well, how broad are you willing to go before you're not really Southern Baptist anymore? Or how broad are you willing to be and how narrow are you willing to be? That's something that every church, I think, has to wrestle with. But what I tend to notice on most local levels, like that aren't dealing with some major things like, women pastors, not women pastors, or, how do we handle even a lot of the social issues nowadays? what I've noticed, generally speaking, is it's usually ego in a lot of these that will tear churches apart.
Ego of the pastor or ego of the congregation?
Yes. It really depends. So I've seen it both ways. I've seen some pastors that are just, it has to be my way or the highway, and it makes people leave. And I've also seen people where it's like the almost a congregation or a group or a faction of the congregation is trying to strong arm the entire church a direction. And then that can cause a split. And that was more my experience with my first church split, which is why I started the channel. And my whole thing was, why can't we learn how to have a conversation about areas we disagree? And we can disagree and acknowledge that we disagree, but love each other like a family does. Because you're married, I'm married, we all have maybe siblings, something like that. Well, we have in-house issues that we bicker about all the time, but I still love my brother, and I'm still going to have my brother's back.
We don't stop having Thanksgiving together. We don't stop having Christmas together.
Right. So why can't we learn how to do that in a church setting? But one of the things I realized was sometimes it's a lot of people's tradition or ego that can get in the way, where they've only looked at something in one way. And if anything is outside of that one way, then therefore you're an unorthodox, you're unchristian, you're worldly, you're whatever, and we slap labels on it, as opposed to, well, can you even articulate the other person's position and why they believe that in the first place?
So it has a lot to do with the bubble that you grew up into. Like, I grew up in a Baptist church, so that's all I know. This is the way I'm doing things. So if you do anything outside of this, then you're a heretic.
Right.
But that's interesting because people don't realize most of the time that you're actually in the minority of Christians, not just today, but for the last 2,000 years.
100%. And so once you realize that, it's a little humbling, because what I tell people all the time, like, are you willing to look back on all the Christians for the past 2,000 years and go, all of you are wrong, half of you aren't even Christian, and throw that many out of the kingdom? That is a level of arrogance that I'm not comfortable with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's something about, like, we stand on the shoulders of the men in the past, and I can disagree with a number of them, but I can also disagree with them respectfully and love the work that they've done at holding the line for the faith. And so there might be certain things that are worth splitting over doctrinally, but I feel like very few of them actually should be reasons. I will put that in a very small lump as to what should really divide people.
So how many conversations do you think you've had with people on your show and just in person about a church that they split from, or even a church that they just left?
Hundreds. I've had hundreds of conversations, either on my YouTube channel about it, or in person, via email, phone calls. I've done a lot of consultation off screen, and that's not something I talk about a lot on my channel. Like, I don't talk about openly, but I do get emails, and so then I'll do a consultation with a church or an elder board or something, just to try to help guide them through something like that, to prevent it from splitting.
What I'd be interested in, for people who don't know, maybe you're just a nominal Christian, or maybe you're a Christian but you've never really been that involved in church. Some people don't understand there's a lot of different governmental makeups of local churches. Like, you have churches who are pastor led. You have churches that are more led by an elder board or a deacon board. That's a small few members of laymen in the church who make the say. Then you have churches who are congregationally led, and that takes on different levels. Sometimes there's a mixture of pastor makes these decisions, or the congregation itself votes on every single issue. I knew congregations that used to have monthly business meetings on whether or not to pay the electric bill.
Really? That's a new one. I was like, oh yeah, monthly meetings. That's pretty normal.
It's an old school. I mean, it's an old school view, but I'd be interested to know, is there a particular governmental style of church leadership that causes more splits than others?
Not that I've noticed, because I've just, in general, it seems like it can happen in any of the church structures. One thing I have noticed, I guess, in a way, is a lot of times if it's completely elder led, one of the things you have to be careful about is the kind of the nepotism that can happen within an elder board, where everyone kind of, well, this is what we're doing, and they kind of get all of them and their cronies kind of like elected into the authority positions, and then butt everyone else out. That can happen.
So a small minority of the church consistently votes in members of their family or their particular group.
Yes.
And even though they're in the minority, they're the ones that always stay in power, almost like an oligarchy.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, there was one particular situation I know of a church that all of a sudden a bunch of people on a big issue showed up who normally are only like once in a while there, and they all put in their vote to vote the thing down, and it like caused a huge fracture in the church. And it's just, so why would we do that? But that was a congregationally led church that pulled that move. And so I've seen it again in both ways. And so really what it would be is that your church would want to try to develop systems that could help prevent those sorts of things from happening. But really, even then, no matter what, any system can be abused, as you and I probably very well know. So biggest thing is making sure you have really good people in those positions and a healthy mindset. One of the things that we say at my church is that we believe that you can bring your brain to church, for example. Okay, well, that means you can think about things, you can think about things differently. You don't always have to agree, but we are going to work together toward our main mission.
Yeah. And I'd like to talk about that a bit more. You talked about putting up systems or guardrails to keep things from going off the edge, because you're right. It can happen no matter what the church structure is, because a church is always made up of saved people, but flawed people. Right. And so I guess I'd like to kind of talk about what are some of those guardrails that we can put in place. And then I also want to, after we've answered that, I want to lead into another question, which is pastors who don't plant churches, but inherit churches, whether they're maybe a youth pastor who gets moved up, maybe they're just someone who's trying to rehab a church and they're adopting these constitutions and systems. So, but first, the original question, what are some of those systems or guardrails that you tell people, hey, this is what I would do to help prevent this from happening again or happening at all?
Yeah, it's each one is kind of situational, because again, it kind of depends what congregation is, what type of church it is, and what their structure is kind of like as a leadership role. But like an elder-led church, one of the things I always mention is make sure that you don't have like direct immediate family on the elder board, usually all at the same time.
Director to the pastor?
Yeah, to the pastor, or even like you don't want to have like 3 brothers all on the same elder board, because they're probably going to be agreeing and steering the church in one direction. And if there's going to be exceptions to something like that, you'd want to make sure it is a very spiritually wise group of people that can actually not be that way. Sometimes it's also just creating a system of like, just because someone's a member of the church, like let's say it's congregationally run, what I ended up implementing after that first year and seeing that split is I shifted the entire leadership. I proposed it because it was congregationally led, and we turned it primarily elder led, but we were very picky on who would be the elders, very strict on these, because basically it was like, if you were in charge of a ministry, you were on the leadership board. It was whatever.
Well, most churches, I mean, when picking their elders is 2 requirements. Are you a man, and do you sometimes attend church?
Right, exactly. As opposed to, well, okay, what spiritual level does this person have in maturity that says that he should be an authority over people in the church?
Yeah.
That's a good question to ask. Is there fruit of that? Is their marriage good, let's say? What's their kids like? Like, what fruit do you see in their life, immediate life, that would show the fact that, oh, that person lives a good and healthy Christian life that would do well in a leadership position? Well,
I think a lot of the churches that are dealing with that, from my experience, majority of my experience has been small to mid-sized churches and working with them, because that's the majority of churches. Majority of churches are not One Life or the Hills or, 1,000, 2,000 people churches.
Right.
So with that, I think a lot of churches end up in those situations just simply because they have a theological belief only men should be elders in the church, which completely understands. There's things in the Bible where we can get to that conclusion. But when you are in a church of only 50 people, and odds are 40 of those might be women or kids, there's only so many men to pick from. And when you start putting in these requirements of you can't be brothers or you can't be family, and then even some other things like to say, if you put the requirement, you have to have read the Bible completely, or you have to have this level of spiritual maturity, your family's got to be here. You can sometimes whittle it down to, we just simply don't have enough men to be elders then. So what are churches supposed to do in that situation when they don't have enough men or just people in the church to step up to that?
I mean, again, every single situation is a little unique, but one of the things for me was like, the church I was leading, we had like 3 elders. And that's it. And they continued to serve until, like, we had term limits, of course. But then though they were allowed to be reelected after that term, especially if there's no one else. So you kind of like have to, because it was a smaller church at this particular one. Oh, and congregationally, by the way, I should mention, before someone could vote congregationally, there should be a system on the amount that they actually attend the church. You know, you can't just join a church and then only show up 6 months later and then vote stuff. Like, why are you here? You haven't been here hardly at all.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on in there. So you should have a system of there's active or inactive voters, something like that. If you're not there for the last 30, 60 days, you're an inactive voter right now. You need to be attending X amount per month.
So like churches who have a membership system, they need to be up on their rolls, not just leave a bunch of people hanging that haven't been to church there forever.
Which I know is not everyone's favorite, because a lot of churches, the admin is already, because usually every ministry is overworked, underpaid. Every ministry in every church almost ever.
Paid.
So, exactly. What do you mean? There's money in this. So, you know, that's, I understand that can be very difficult to keep up. But when it comes to elder boards, that's why I said, like, even if you're going to have family on there, just make sure that they are a level of spiritual maturity that can handle the fact that, hey, it's not about your agenda. It's about what's the part of the focus of the entire church. And that's why it's like, what is your church good at, and what is the mission is going at? Like, my church it talks about equipping a Christ-centered community that helps those far from God trust and follow Jesus. All right, so that means if you all are going to be related and connected here, and you better be making decisions, then that follow in with that major mission of ours. And if your decision takes us away from that, well, okay, but why? And is there a good reason for that? And if not, then, well, we got to keep pushing our resources toward our main mission. Yeah. So just things like that, where you just need to ask yourselves the question, why, what, and all those things. But generally speaking, it literally is just people's ego tend to get in the way, and they have their pet topics, and they want to hammer those pet topics a lot. Yeah. And once that happens, it can really derail church.
I think people just get very scared, and it gets to the point when people are scared, what they tend to do is want to take control of something, because we always kind of feel like we can do a better job. Yeah. And so what I've kind of described it as, that some churches go under a mutiny where the pastor may even inherit a situation or come into a situation not knowing how bad it was, and you have elder members or church leaders, depending on how the church is structured.
That was my first church.
Yeah. Everyone's grasping at the wheel, trying to take hold of the ship.
Yep.
But when you have a bunch of people doing that, if you have the picture of a bunch of people pulling at a wheel of a ship, the ship has no direction that it's going.
Well, 100%. You're bound to hit some rocks, right? Like,
absolutely.
It's going to crash.
So what do you do then? Because I think that's when the church has its highest tension, is not just after going through one kind of a tough season or one split, but also knowing that, okay, when we try and start this again, another split's going to happen. Yep. So when you have someone who's going into a tense church situation as a new pastor, or taking over from another pastor who had a falling out or something, what can they do to either work within those systems or change those systems in a way that's not going to hurt the church again? Yeah,
well, and that is the ultimate question. And that one is actually probably the one I hear of the absolute most, is pastor took over and then something explodes, right? Because you stepped on a landmine you didn't even know existed because you're brand new.
Or even it just exploded, and that's the whole reon you're taking over in the first place.
Because usually, if you're coming in, it's usually someone retired, they moved, or maybe there's some scandal, or maybe they ran some guy out. Whew, there's a lot with that. And so, I mean, that was my first. They ran out a pastor before, and they framed it one way. And the more I was there, the more I was like, okay, there's more to it.
That's exactly what happened to me as well.
Yeah. And it's like, the more I am around, the more I realize that's not exactly what happened. So one thing is for certain in those situations. One, every pastor needs to know, if you take over a church like that, it's not your fault if things blow up. You cannot blame yourself, because I went through a whole thing. I'm like, do I just suck at this? Like, am I prepared for this? Am I ready for this? You don't do that to yourself, because you likely didn't do anything wrong, or if you did something wrong, it's very minute in comparison to the amount of like garbage that you didn't realize was rolling downhill full speed. Yeah. So, best thing to do is try to build some strong relationships and build trust. I always mention, like, your first year there, it should be almost your listening phase.
Yeah, a honeymoon period.
Yes, you give it before you do some major, even though you might see some giant holes in the ship. Remember that if they're not bought into the vision, they're not going to cooperate. This is the way we've always done it. We've done it this way for 45 years. You know, you're going to hear stuff like that. And so if that's the case, then what you want to do is build relationships, find who are your key leaders, and get to know your key leaders in that church who have kept that church kind of running without you. And once you build that, start pitching them your vision. If you can get the key leaders that are bought in, you can probably get the rest of the congregation bought in.
Yeah.
Or at least you'll have a greater success rate. You have like an 80% and then maybe a 20% leave as opposed to a full 50-50 split or worse.
Yeah.
But even then, I mean, there's certain situations where you just kind of have to, I joke around that I had to just kind of pull weeds, and I had to realize that.
Yeah.
Like, once I realized that I hit a wall, I was like, okay, this is not going well. There's no way there's no pivot here that is positive for the church. We're just at an impasse.
And there's some places where you just enter a situation and the wall is right there because maybe the church is literally a sinking ship financially.
Yep.
Attendance is already falling off a cliff because of the continued trauma. That's not your fault. You know, you came into the situation, but there are those few moments where guys are like, I feel like I can't have a honeymoon period because if we don't make changes right now, there's not going to be a church to lead in a year.
And that is very true. And if that situation happens, then of course, do what is necessary, but still target your primary leaders, right? Like target your primary leaders and then be that honest with them. Be like, I came here to lead this church. We're on a crash course. We're lucky if we keep the doors open in a year if we don't make these changes. So we're going to have to do this, but I need you guys on board.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes that's where we almost need to fix the pastor hiring processes that most of our churches go through.
Whoa. Don't get me started on the pastor hiring processes.
Yeah, well, I'll go through simply what I feel like I see as a problem needs to change. Often what I see, especially when churches have been through a traumatic event of sorts in their church, they almost feel like we need to sell you on coming here. So they need to paint the most beautiful picture of what this church is. They minimize the problems that they are there, and they're just trying to sell you on the possibility of what could be in the future. And what ends up happening is that they're actually hiding all of the bad stuff that's going on.
All sorts of skeletons in the closet that they're not being honest about.
And it's really not fair to the pastor because he didn't really get a full view on what he was coming into. That's why I almost feel like we should view the interview process as a two-way street. As much as you're interviewing the pastor should have the right to interview you.
That's what I tell people every time. Before you take a pastoral job, you need to interview them harder than they've interviewed you, because that very problem that you're talking about uprooting your entire family maybe somewhere. You need to know what you're walking into.
Yeah. And I've been through interviews where I think they've been really frustrated with me. Like I almost came off too aggressive. And I think part of it is like, I've been hurt. I don't want me or my family to be hurt again. And so I don't think it's really as bad a thing if I want to be open and honest, be like, hey, I want to see where you're at financially. I want to be able to see where you guys are standing right now, because I need to make sure that I'm safe to have a 1 to 2 year runway just to be here without immediately going into survival mode.
Right. Because
honestly, pastors need to understand where their gifting and where their maturity is at to know if they can even handle certain situations.
That's why not only they say it's unfair to the pastor to do that, but it's also unfair to the church, because the church might have a particular need. Like the church might be like, hey, we really are struggling, maybe financially, or maybe with attendance, maybe with their building or whatever. But if you're hiring a guy who was sold one thing and he has that particular set of skills, like, oh, I can do that. Then he walks in and it's a whole nother set of skills that's required. You just set your church up and him up for failure. What you want to do is do you want your church to succeed? Then be as open about all those issues going on, because a lot of times pastors want to minister and they want to help. But if it's not within their like wheelhouse, they're going to be like, I don't think I'm your guy. But they also might know a guy who is. So always network that. For example, me, I am very much, my focus is theology, philosophy, apologetics. Those are some of my biggest strengths. I'm heavy on discipleship and evangelism. Those are going to be my primary strengths. Now, if you're like, hey, I need a guy who does finance and all that, I can do that. I was a business manager. But also if you're like, hey, our facility's got all this, we need remodel, we need this vision. I'm like, well, you probably don't want me to be leading your facility project, right? Like that's not my skill set. So just depends, and being honest about what your goals are as a church can help the hiring process. And that way the pastor feels like it's a good fit. You guys know it's a good fit. And then even if it's a challenge, he knows he's going to, hey, I'm going to walk up this mountain for a bit. It's going to be an uphill battle, but he knows it. He's going into it knowing that.
Yeah. And, with that, when you've started to go in and interview people, how is it that they've kind of come out of the trauma of going to a church split? Because I was talking with my sister the other day who's studying psychology, and I was talking about a clip that I saw when a pastor said church hurt isn't real. And I have someone who says, like, it's 100% real. And I think the trauma that you get from church hurt is unique from a lot of different other traumas, because it impacts you at every level of your life, because it impacts you at a spiritual level, of course. Trauma is a mental thing. It impacts you physically. It impacts you relationally, because oftentimes that's where our family's gone. That's where all of our friends are at.
Yeah, your community's there.
Yeah. It impacts you financially because you've been giving there for X amount of time. And especially if there's a scandal, it's like, man, what have I even been faithful? And so there's all these things that come with that. How have people that you've talked to reacted to coming out of a church split or a church hurt situation? And how long has it taken them to like really reinvest themselves into a church community?
Well, I mean, each one is so different. Again, I always feel like I have to caveat that, but it's just because it's true. It's taken some people years to get through it. Sometimes some kind of come out more unscathed than others. But one of the things I always tell people is you cannot, just because one church failed you, we go to church to participate in the fellowship of what the church is supposed to be. And so, yeah, one church will fail you because it's full of people, but also it won't fail you necessarily. Not every church is going to fail you in the same way. And so don't go in to every church with that trauma and all that negativity with you and bring that onto them either, because that's not fair to a new church, right? But what you can do is you can learn from those things. Hey, what were some of the patterns? What were some of the things? Like that first split I went through, and I have since there's one other split I went through, but I learned from that first split as a pastor. I was way more passive, and I did eventually one day just confront the group. I was like, basically, this is where we're going. Get on board or ship out. Like, this is where I can't do this, and the church can't either. And I had to have that really confrontational thing. But the problem is I kind of let it go too long, where I kept trying to make peace, and it wasn't going to happen. And I kept ignoring the elephant in the room, because I was told. Now, I don't know how much you are about Myers-Briggs personalities, but I'm an ENTJ. I'm very direct. I'm called the commander type. And because of that, I was basically always told that was wrong of me. Don't be too direct. That's mean. That's harsh. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to try to do this properly. Well, come to find out, I needed to pull the weed. The next time it came up, I was like, I learned my lesson. I'm going to nip this in the bud right away and become direct as necessary. And I did. And only a couple of families left, and the rest of the church was protected. And I was like, okay, I didn't want them to leave, but I was able to nip that in the bud before it became a cancer that destroyed more things internally. So learning how to overcome that trauma is also going, what lessons did you learn? Like me? Okay, I need to be more proactive, embrace the gift God gave me as far as what I am. And that helped bring unity, and so don't always look at every split as something that's awful that you went through and hyper focus on it. What were the things you learned? What are the things you're grateful for? And do your best to make peace with the people that left or hurt you. And if you can't because they've cut you out or whatever, then forgive them and move through that. But I mean, I say that as someone who's been through a lot in life, as a hard childhood. I went through all the things. So it's easy for me to say that in a sense because I've processed a lot of stuff like that. So I'm able to kind of, for some people, if they never had that sort of thing, and then their first real traumatic experience is a church split, that can be like whiplash because the church isn't supposed to be that. Yeah.
And I'd be interested. Most people, I feel like inevitably, if you go to church your entire life, you're going to be a part of a church split in some way. You will be a contingent that stays. You could be a contingent that left. So inevitably, if you're a pastor, you're going to have somebody that comes to your church who either left a church or their pastor went through a crazy moral failure or scandal or something. How do you pastor and lead a person in that way to continue to have trust in authority, but also lead them in a way of trust and understanding that and recognize what they've gone through?
Yeah. Relationships first. It's one of those things that people don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care. I know it's like a cliche, but it's very true. So, as someone, and that's hard for me because as an apologist, like I'm a theologian and an apologist. Like I want to be like, well, these are your reasons why. Just get in the game, man. But that's my nature.
Yeah.
Sometimes people need time to heal and process and just be ministered to.
Yeah.
So if somebody just came from a church where there was a huge moral failure from the pastor, give them space, but build that relationship, but let them trust you, be transparent, even be transparent about the issues you've even had at your church. But don't like trauma dump on them, but just be transparent to where they realize, okay, this is a good place to trust because they are being honest about the good, the bad, the ugly. And the other thing is I always mention this to pastors to protect yourself. If they just popped out of a church, we just left that church, there's some things going on there we didn't like, that should be a red flag, or at least a yellow flag. Why are they there? Yeah. Now, did they leave for good reasons or bad reasons? They're telling you probably a good reason, or they're going to color it that way, but you don't necessarily know that could be the problem child, right? So get to know them, be careful before you start shoving them into leadership positions. You want to let them get a feel for them before you start doing that, because and then that one of the questions I always ask, we left this church. Oh, why'd you leave that? How long were you there? I'll ask that. How long were you there?
Yeah.
Well, we were there a year or two. Okay. Well, where were we before that? We were there. Well, how long were we there? About 3 years. Yeah. There's a pattern.
Yeah. And you see that sometimes with pastors too. Yeah. 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So when you see that, it should be this weird moment of like, okay, so are they the problem or are you the problem? Are you unable to work in unity amongst diversity of thought? What
are some of the archetypes of those type of people that are just floating from church to church to church? I've had an idea of writing a book that I would call Crazy Church People.
Long book.
I think there's archetypes, like the type of people that would leave. So I'd be interested. What do you think is like a common archetype of person that church hops?
Oh man, it's definitely the hardcore, like Bible thumping fundamentalist. That's definitely going to be one of them, because they are right about everything and wrong about nothing. And they just take the plain reading of scripture on everything, which is always their own interpretation. But
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. Different route, not the fundamentalist, but what I would call the theological outcast, where they have a theology, it just doesn't fit in anywhere. They take this from the charismatic side, they take this from the Calvinist side, they take this from the Catholics, and it's this mismatch of stuff that maybe worked in like a church of their childhood, but they get so unhappy every other church they go to.
Oh yeah, you're preaching to the choir on that one. I mean, if you knew half of my theological positions, I am a mutt, and I am not only a mutt, but I hold multiple minority views in the Protestant world, but I know that, and I accepted that that's my responsibility. So even when Pastor Brett, who's been on this channel before, when I sat down with Pastor Brett for the interview process, they started asking me my position on controversial issues, and I just went, okay, you know what? I've now realized we've reached that part of the interview, so let me tell you my greatest hot takes of my positions. You're willing to ask any question. I'm not here to debate. I'll explain whatever you want, or if any of them's a deal breaker, I don't want to waste your time.
Yeah.
And I accepted that. And so I just laid them all out. And Pastor Brett actually, he's like, I agree with that one. I agree with that one. I agree with that one. That was a little weird. And I agree with that one. I don't see any problems here. And I was like, I was shocked. Yeah. I was sitting there like a deer in headlights, like, what in the world?
Well, do you think that's a strength of, because oftentimes, I mean, let's be honest, most Christians kind of slam on non-denominational churches, especially our Catholic and Orthodox friends.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. But I think there is a strength of saying like, okay, you have the freedom to think for yourself and what you're convicted by. And, sometimes there's much I personally value a lot of theological systems because whether people mind-numbingly just go about it like a zombie or not, there's a reason that a lot of these have worked for so long is because there's a semblance of truth in them.
100%.
Yeah. But another archetype that I think of is someone who's more or less a control freak, not in the way that maybe we think that they're demanding a leadership position, but they believe they have a certain talent that they want to be able to use in church. So they'll just go anywhere that they have a voice or a platform to use their quote unquote talent.
Oh, well, that is absolutely a stereotype that exists in that. Like, oh, no, well, I really want to do this and they want to let me do it, or they stopped doing this ministry because like no one was interested in it. So they're like, well, let's try to focus elsewhere or whatever it is. They do. Yeah. Those people bounce around church to church like little ping pong balls.
And it was so funny. One of the first churches I preached at regularly, it was a small church and right on the border of Arkansas and Missouri. And I was a senior in high school, and I would preach there twice every Sunday, basically for like half my senior year of high school. And it was a very small church, probably about 12 people. And there was a group that would come on the morning. That was the small group. And then the church would double in size at night because they would still do two things. They did a testimony time.
Oh, yes.
Where people would tell their testimonies. And then they would do a specials time. You know what I mean by specials?
Is that when they like do some sort of musical number or whatever?
Yeah. Anyone could come up and do a song that they wanted to.
Ooh, that's risky.
Yeah. So people would come up with their CD cases, and there was a particular, there was couples that exclusively came just to do music. They wouldn't go to this church in the morning. They wouldn't tied to this church, but they came there at night because it was there that they got to use their talent of singing that their home church wouldn't let them use during the day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that being an issue and people doing that. Yeah, and that's why I still think like, I mention all the time on my channel that we can have unity and diversity of thought, that we're supposed to be united in Christ. And then, you know, we can have diversity of thought on a number of issues, and it's okay to acknowledge that. Like, that's why, like, you know, with our Roman Catholic friends, and I have a lot of Roman Catholic friends, but, you know, the teaching of the magisterium is basically like, this is the teachings, you can't disagree. Well, my favorite part about a non-denom church that I'm at is that I can have a diversity of thought. And then on top of that, I reserve the right to change my mind. You know, I don't want someone to be like, you have to stay in this box in order for you to have this job, unless it's like something that's outright rejecting Christianity. Like, well, I don't believe Jesus rose from the dead. Okay, well, you're fired, you know, like, but otherwise it's like, you know, you can have that. And, you know, and then the people who are out there for ego, like I mentioned, ego is oftentimes what's at the center of it, that pride, that can be really distracting or detrimental to a church. And the church, you know, we need to be careful not to recognize people also just for the gifts, because some of those people you even mentioned, some of them are they are gifted. They are very good. But are you putting someone in that position just because they're good at it, or because they also have a certain spiritual wherewithal that can help guide the church using that gift?
Yeah. And another topic I wanted to broach with you, is there a time where it's a good reason to split a church?
I mean, I hate to say yes, because I don't like them. I feel like they should be very rare.
But is there a case where there's a necessary evil to it?
Yes, I do think so at times, because I mean, even Jesus recognizes that the separating the wheat from the chaff, sometimes you just have to pull the weeds up. And there are times where there are people who are in your church who do not have the best interest of the church or other people in mind. And you have to recognize, I mean, there are wolves in sheep's clothing. That is a thing. Jesus talks about watch out for the wolves among the sheep. And so sometimes you have to realize, yeah, you have wolves among you, and you got to run them out as a shepherd. And certain people absolutely hate that, because, and you know, that's a weird part of my personality. I kind of enjoy that part where I'm like, oh, I found you. Oh, I can't wait to butt heads with this. This is gonna be fun. Like, I'm gonna poke it with a stick, you know. Like, that's. But also the other thing is, if you're at an impasse, you know, you only have so much time, so much money, so much resources, so many volunteers, so whatever. You can only go so many directions. You can't possibly check every box. Well, if this is the direction that clearly the church needs to go, and there's certain people who aren't on board, well, then you just need to take that direction.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, that I see situations all of the time where people recognize that their church has a lot of problems, and problems that simply aren't going to be solved because of the way their leadership structures are, for instance. Mm-hmm. And they recognize that maybe the church has corruption. They recognize that the church is dead or dying, and they're smart. They see all of these problems, but they just stay anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where it's like, okay, so then also the question comes into, where are you best used for your gifts? I mean, that's one of the questions I ask a lot of people. I'm like, all right, so what's your gifting? What's the best place for you to be at? You know, are you going to a place just because you've always gone there? Or are you going to go get locked into a place where you can actually make a difference for the kingdom of God. And as opposed to making a smaller difference, you can make a larger difference. And, there is different churches allow for different things. Like one church I was the teaching elder at, because of my theology and apologetics bend, they didn't have anyone who taught anything like that in the church. So I taught a whole apologetics class, and it quickly grew. There's a huge interest in that particular church for that interest. Great. Well, I'm making a good impact for the kingdom of God here. However, I also know there's churches, if I brought apologetics and philosophy and theology in, I'd be like, all right, guys, we're going to do this. You'd have crickets and maybe like one person show up to try to support you, Yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, which church which one should Will Hess be at? Yeah. Well, probably the one that, people hungry for it, and not the one that's like, look, man, our church is primarily focused on maybe feeding the poor and doing these things there, that not so much like the intellectual combating of the various ideologies of the day, deceiving people. Now, does this church need that? Yeah, they need it. But also, again, what are the gifts and the bend of the people in the church?
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because I think a lot of people, when they would think about a non-denominational church, they would think, oh yeah, it's a place where you go, you get the fluff sermon, you hear the worship, and you sneak out, you get out as soon as you can. And that's the accusation of large modern churches, right?
Yeah, you hear it often.
Yeah. So it's interesting to me that you're like, oh, okay, I'm someone who's actually very much involved in philosophy and real intellectualism, and, wanting to defend the faith. But I guess one thing I would like to ask about that is, do you think most Christians can even handle having those conversations?
The reality is, yes and no. No, in the sense that they're not equipped. A lot of Christians, if I actually did this recently, I teach a Bible class. At a Christian academy, and I pulled out a piece of paper and had all the students. I was like, all right, guys, write down why you think Christianity is true. Give me reasons. And it was pretty abysmal. Yeah. And if I did that with most adults, write down why you think Christianity is true. And now what's funny is on a Sunday, if I went, and this is the word of God, and we stand on the word of God, I'd get a bunch of like, amens, hallelujahs, that is. All right, why? Because it says so. Well, so does the Quran. What is okay, so why? And so no, because a lot of Christians just aren't equipped with the knowledge, and they're not willing to do the legwork to get the knowledge. If I mentioned reading a book, you'll see nowadays people are like, oh gosh. But yes, in the sense that you're capable of doing it. You can, if you can learn anything, you can learn this stuff. Like it's just like anything else.
That's why it probably leads to like my hottest take for some pastors and ministry leaders to hear. I not only think deconstruction can be a good thing, I think it's necessary for any ministry leader to go through if you're going to teach the Bible.
Ooh, that is a hot take. I like that.
Yeah. And I'll explain why. It's because when I was going through seminary, it's what I was taken through. They stripped us down to the pillars of our faith, because we all came in, we all came from church backgrounds. So we all were carrying these biases of, I came from a Baptist church, I came from a Pentecostal church, I came from a Methodist church. But really, the core of it, there wasn't a lot to base that on. Those beliefs weren't really attached to anything. It was like, well, my pastor told me this. And, there were some people in there, they'd never even read the Bible cover to cover. Mm-hmm. And so that deconstruction for us was necessary to actually get down to, what does the Bible say? And, to us less, but what does the tradition of the church say? And then actually rebuild that on the solid ground of Scripture. And so that would be my hot take, is I actually think deconstruction should play a role in how we develop leaders of the church.
Well, I know that's why I always say we need deconstruction, then reconstruction.
Yeah. The bad part is when you have atheists out there who are dealing with church hurt, who want to just deconstruct and tear down Christianity, because then all you're left with is rubble, and people have no meaning in their lives now.
Oh yeah. And and the statistics bear that out. Again, I could go on whole tangents about that with the data. But to your main point here to discuss, that is the deconstruction part is important, to strip back your faith on everything. What does the Bible say? Why does the Bible say it? What is the cultural, like ancient Near Eastern setting of why the Bible said that? Do you understand it within its context, or are you reading it with a 16th century, 21st century lens over it? Then the other question is okay, do you understand why you're a Christian? And not just, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. Do you have good reasons to believe that? like stripping back your faith to deconstruct it, so that way you can reconstruct it on more solid ground. That's why I always say deconstruct and reconstruct, because a lot of people just have been believe what, like you said, what the pastors always told them or whatever. Strip it back, then rebuild, and then also understand, hey, now that you've rebuilt this, when you first hear of someone else's theological take, insert any controversial position here.
Yeah.
Can you at least say, before you say I disagree, can you say I understand?
Yeah. And I guess that leads to another question then. How do you teach people on what's important enough to actually have an argument or a conversation over?
Say that again.
So we all have theological differences. Yep. When you're teaching someone apologetics, how do you teach them to know, like, okay, this is actually worth having a conversation or debate over? Because if not, we would just be arguing about every little thing.
Oh, that is true. So oftentimes when I teach, I do what I call the window shopping approach, which is, all right, so let's talk Revelation. You have, futurism, you have idealism, you have preterism, you have historicism. Okay, which view is right? Okay, well, here's the main things that each view says. And bottom line is they all believe Jesus wins. Okay, so the bottom line is still the same, but just different ways that can look. So I always try to bring it to the unifying factor before we start talking about the differences. The only things that when you really start, I always say basically is the things worth fighting over and debating and arguing over are things that can bring into question the character of God. Which means it deals with his very nature and his ontology. And then the other thing is whether or not Jesus Christ rose from the dead bodily, because you're dealing with the very heart of Christianity. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity is not true. And then also the existence of one God. Like if you can get to those areas, those are areas really worth fighting over. Everything else, pretty much have a good time.
I think what I see a lot of people go over is when we get into what we believe about the Bible, because obviously when the Bible is the foundation of how we come to have this knowledge now, I think that's where a lot of the arguments start. And I think if my Generation Z actually begins to start diving deep into the Bible and not just, oh, my favorite TikTok theologian said this.
Right.
We're going to begin to have a lot of really tough conversations about scripture. So how do you even address those? Because there's so many little arguments that we can have about scripture. We can argue the major things of creationism and intelligent design and all of that. Or we could even get into the areas of who wrote the book of Hebrews. Right. So how do you know when those things are important enough that we need to draw lines about what's heresy and what's open for discussion?
Right. Well, this is where church history is useful, because when you get into the church history, you'll notice that the first few hundred years of the church was mostly considered Christology, the nature of Christ. How is God triune? How does the hypostatic union work? How is he fully God, fully man? And then you also deal with, so you're dealing more with his nature. So if you understand why all the main ecumenical councils started, you deal with those heresies that they were responding to, you pretty much will have what is the core of Christianity. So you keep that at the center. Well,
that was the purpose of the Nicene Creed to begin with. We had to list out, this is what it means to be a follower of Christ.
Right, exactly. And this is the nature of who he is. He's consubstantial with the Father and all those things in there. So that is where knowing your history is helpful. The other thing is understanding that creationism versus theistic evolution, old earth, young earth, all those things that Christians debate over. Bottom line is understanding you might be asking even the wrong question, because in the ancient Near Eastern world, Genesis 1-11, it's in Hebraic poetry. It is, and the whole point is it's polemical against paganism. And there's a lot of, that's why you'll find out that there's other Mesopotamian flood accounts and they have some similarities. Well, why? Well, because the Bible's it's responding and saying, this is wrong, this is right. So be careful on trying to major on something that the text is not trying to major on. Is responding to the fact that the sun, moon, and stars aren't things to be worshipped, is made by the one to be worshipped. And bottom line is, the way I say with theistic evolution, for example, and I'm not a theistic evolutionist, I'm actually relatively agnostic on the issue of age of the earth even. I don't really care. It's not an area I'd really care about. But either way, God had to create it. God had to, if you're a theistic evolutionist, you're believing multiple mutations created eventually human beings, right? Image bearers.
Yeah.
Well, if that's the case, I know I have a gene mutation. Fun fact for you, Jonah, I have a gene mutation that is a muscular degenerative disease. I have a 20% chance of landing in a wheelchair after the age of 50. And that's because I have a mutation. Great. It's not helpful. You know, I'm not getting X-Men superpowers. You know, most mutations are detrimental to the organism. So, okay, you have millions of these things to create human beings. Someone or something super, super smart and powerful would have had to guide that process. You have a really good argument for design there. Yeah. Creationism, you already have an argument for design and creation. It built into that system. Either way, what's the core? What's the center point? God created. And then we can, if we're going to debate those things, debate it knowing that it's an in-house debate. You guys are both love God. You're both followers of Christ. Now you're arguing with your brother, like at Thanksgiving, and then afterwards you're going to go outside, crack open a Coke, and watch the game or something. I don't know.
I think a lot of people shy away from that attitude, though, because sometimes you feel like that. I don't want to, you never want to go soft on heresy because you understand like it is a domino effect that once there is history to say some of these churches, when they opened the door to certain things, I mean, and interpretations of the Bible, it went downhill fast. Like we're talking about institutions like Anglican and Methodist, they existed for hundreds of years. And over the course of 30 years,
huge downward spiral on that. Like, on sexuality issues and everything.
Which I've always pointed out, it's so interesting that when they did studies during COVID, when churches had more pressure to be political, churches that went hardcore conservative in their views of the Bible and politics, they would have like a little bump. And then like it would just plateau. Like there wasn't like a continued like surge of growth usually. Liberal churches like would shoot down almost immediately when you took a more liberal view of theology and of the Bible. And it was a really interesting stat that came out about that.
I'm not surprised.
I mean, simply when the core of what you believe is you should do whatever makes you happy and you're doing good wherever you're going, there's not really a lot of conviction to go to a place where the Bible holds a lot of correction. There's a lot of encouragement in the Bible, but also there's a lot of correction that's good for us to take.
Arguably more correction. I mean, I just got done reading Isaiah and Jeremiah, and
it's a lot of correction.
A lot of correction. I actually have said that I'm like, if you got a guy preaching Jeremiah the way Jeremiah preached, on a lot of pulpits today, he would be told he's mean, he's harsh, he shouldn't be a pastor, he's not being Christ-like. And it's like, well, no, so God's a father. He's a loving father. But I also know as a father, sometimes you're stern. And you have to say it the way it is. And so it's like, well, no, God's a loving father, but he's also a corrective father. And he does that because he loves you, you know? So, and that's where, again, understanding what kind of are the core things. And church history is, again, useful for this. If you go all the way back to, like, the Didache, for example, if you're familiar with it.
Absolutely.
The Didache being...
Just barely missed the Bible.
Right, exactly. And the Didache is, like, the earliest thing where Christians got together and was like, all right, this is how we practice Christianity.
This is our handbook for how we go about things.
Right. And when you get into the Didache, it mentions right out the gate, talks about sexuality issues. It mentions even pederasty, which is dealing with like male, like older men with younger boy relationships. Like, you will not do these things. And it like lists these things out where you're like, okay, so if your practice goes against the things from the earliest Christians, no. Like, that can't be tolerated in the church. That's why, like, if churches go soft on the sexuality issues. Well, bottom line is every Christian, every human being is called the same sexual ethos, which is one man with one woman under one marriage for one life. We're all called to that. So anything that is like, love is love, all that. Nope, that's not tolerated. That's not because we don't love you. That's because we do love you, that we tell you.
How do you go into places then to say, I'm going to keep this from being an argument, and I'm going to keep this as a friendly conversation, especially, I'll say, among Christians who are usually within the same sphere. So churches that do so, I think the fundamental thing is that we do believe in the infallibility of Scripture. That even though we may not believe a certain quote unquote fundamentalist view of Scripture.
There's different ways on how to articulate that.
But let's say, for instance, we do believe we're starting on the same ground, essentially. How do we then talk about some of these issues and differences without it becoming a full-blown argument of you're not a Christian, you're a heretic, da 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 da.
I think having a level of understanding and asking questions first. So why does a person believe that? I mean, I even at my church, I hear people say things all the time like, ooh, yikes. And it's just because they're ignorant. They don't know. So it's not like that they're bad. So sometimes they don't know some things. Information's powerful. And that's what bothers me when you get anti-intellectualism in church. I'm like, no, information's powerful. It changes the way we view God and the way we practice our faith, right? So sometimes I just have a conversation, I ask them some questions. And if they say something that's like really outlandish, like if they say something like that Marcion taught, like the Marcion heresy, that's like the God of the Old Testament is essentially different than Jesus.
And that actually kind of has roots that go back into more liberal theologies today, which is really interesting.
Oh yeah, you still see that come up, and it drives me crazy when I hear it. Because I'm like, Jesus is like, I came to not bring peace, but a sword. And then they're like, Jesus is so much of like the slovey hipster. I'm like, he'd make a whip and chase people. Like, what are you talking? Like, there's both with him.
Well, let me ask this, man. How do you prepare a message and preach? Let's just say if you were the everyday communicator of a congregation, which you have been in the past.
Did it almost 10 years.
Yeah. And so how do you go about, I'm going to speak to people on an intellectual level who are ready for it, but also I'm still going to teach and preach in a way that the person who's brand new on Sunday can still understand and take something away from this?
That is challenging for people. For certain, I guess, people, I've always kind of done that, I guess you could say this, but it's part of how my brain is wired. So it also, again, giftings and wirings all kind of matter. But the way I do it is when I'm teaching through, obviously, if I'm going through a passage like Galatians 4 or something. Okay. What does the passage say? Okay, this is exactly what the passage is talking about. All right, great. So now what do I say to the Christian in the room about that? Okay, well, if the Christian in the room about that, all right, so now I'm going to give spiritual application. But what about someone who might be questioning certain things? Or what's some tidbits of information that undergird this that the Bible's kind of already presupposing that you have under you? Like sometimes you have to, like actually a few months ago, we talked about finding meaning in Christ's mission. How do you participate in that mission? Well, so what I did is throughout the entire thing is I talked about the character of Christ, the patterns in his life. Is it repeatable that human beings can do? Because like you're not going to be able to die today and then just come back in 3 days. So that's probably not going to happen. I mean, it could happen, but Jonah, if you get killed by a car wreck, I'm not expecting to see you in 3 days.
Understandable.
So okay, is it repeatable? Now, all right, now I'm preaching that about Jesus. But then what I did is in the middle of the message, I was like, because here's the thing, you need meaning. And instead of trying to create your own mission, you can step into someone else's mission and God's mission, because your mission doesn't matter. Your own subjective mission doesn't matter. So if you don't believe in God to begin with, you're just a space accident. That's all you really are.
So a lot of it comes down to the intentionality of not just, going with your own flow where you're at, where you think most of your church is at, but it's like, okay, I need to keep in mind that there's people here that have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yes. And the other aspect of that is you need to be able to speak to those things because somebody might be struggling with their faith. They might be deconstructing and wondering, is this even real to begin with? Well, now, okay, so not only am I going to talk about the spiritual application here, but I'm going to look at over here where, all right, what about an argument for meaning? If I'm talking about finding mission in what Christ's life and life was and is and still is on the throne, okay, so how do I make that make sense? Well, now I can make an argument for meaning, just like we can make an argument for morality and other things for the existence of God. And now I can take that, plug it into my mission, my missional message here. And now there's something for people who are grounded on what they can step into. People who are doubting, oh, that's a good reason to believe in God. Yeah, I want my life to have meaning. If I have a space accident, nothing matters really. Morals don't matter. What I do in my life doesn't matter because I'm going to live, I'm going to die, whatever. And then if someone's struggling, they can also go, oh, I have a purpose in life.
Yeah. New question. Within this same vein, you're a youth pastor right now at One Life. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So, and this happens with adults too. We have such an influx of influencers and pastors in our day-to-day lives. We all have different people on TikTok, on Instagram, YouTube. And what I think is kind of dangerous about it is that the algorithm wants to play into people that don't necessarily challenge us, but that we just want. Some of us like to be challenged. Some of us like listening to Philip Anthony Mitchell, for instance, yell at us, over a short. But I think there is a time where we talk to someone and they're like, yeah, I've been really growing in my faith. I've been listening to so-and-so, I've been reading so-and-so, and we're internally like, no.
Oh yeah. Had that happen to me like 2 weeks ago. Someone's like, oh, I've really been listening to this guy. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah.
No bueno.
How do those conversations go when you approach someone and say, hey, you do not need to be listening to that person?
Oh, I mean, it just depends on the person. I mean, I just come out and say it like that. Hey, that's not, oh, do you know what other things that person said? What? They said this, this, and this. They said what? Yeah, exactly. Or do you know they believe that X, Y, and Z? And the problem with that is this. Oh, I did not know that. Like, yeah, so be careful who you listen to.
Yeah, and that's the problem too, is some of these things that we clip, I will say this about some of them, they were taken, that we're sometimes talking about a snippet of a sermon from 10 years ago, right? So sometimes I sometimes feel unjustified to talk against someone when I know they said something that borderlined heresy, but also it was a 30-second clip from 10 years ago, and it may not even be at that point anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for me on that, I mean, I have a different view on that. I just say, free game, man. You said it publicly. You haven't rescinded the statement. You haven't showed any difference. All I have in my evidence then is the fact that you teach this and you believe this.
Yeah.
So unless there's evidence that says otherwise, I'm going to roll that this is, and then if I have to issue a statement of, oh, they did reach out to me, or hey, they have corrected this, I will rescind it. I might take down the video or the article I wrote or whatever. Yeah. But until then, it's like, well, you said that.
Yeah. Well, I even think too, like, how bad does it have to be? Because we do have a culture of wanting to slam dunk on dudes. Like I always say, if you want to grow your YouTube channel fast and it's a ministry YouTube channel, go dunk on somebody real quick and you'll grow.
Yeah. I mean, coming from the guy who hosts the church split, there is some truth to that, because I'm always dunking on, my pet theological issues or whatever. Yeah. But that's also why I've even shifted to doing like what I call essays, because I'm like, I don't want it to just be a dunking channel. I want it to be educational as well. But some things deserve to be dunked.
And I agree with that. I think there's dudes that need to be called out.
Yep.
I think there's guys that have
Mike Winger's doing a good job of that right now.
He's doing a lot of things right now. But that's always the scary thing to me is there's accusations of things, and there's guys I'm like, hey, enough stuff came out, like, yeah, you're done. But
straight cooked.
Yeah, but I always worry too. I'm like, you have these accusations that come out, and some about leaders, some that have to do with sex scandals and stuff like that. But also, how many of those things that come out that turn out to be not true, and people saying, can I get a quick payout from this? So to try and cover it up.
Well, I mean, every single time a scandal comes up, like there's right now, it just came out that Sam Alberry is stepping down because he admits that he had a relationship with another man. Apparently, this just came out, I think, last night. But he admitted, and he stepped away. So I was like, okay, so that's probably true, right? Yeah. The guy admits it, he steps away. But if it's an accusation, every time it's an accusation, I'm like, we'll see before I start bringing out my torches and pitchforks, because I want to see the evidence. And I would like people to do the same for me or for you or for anyone else. If you're accused of something, don't assume the worst. Yeah. Sometimes it's skewed. And so you have to be careful.
And there's a point in me where I have a lot of grace, because also, I mean, I've been recorded preaching since I was 16 years old.
Same.
And there's a lot of stuff in there that I hope never sees the light of day, and I hope stays buried. But, with that, I have a thing where I want to show grace to people. So, like, for instance, I even know, like, a few years ago, there was like a big rain on, people who were dunking on preferably non-denominational people or Pentecostal people who had said something about the Trinity, and it would come out like, this big pastor said something, is a oneness, whatever. And then I go watch the clip, and it's like, okay, I could have heard that at like most Baptist churches. And I don't really see that as proof that he's denying the Trinity. it could easily just be he misspoke or had heard that from someone not knowing that X leads to Y.
About the metaphysics of it, or because there's, sometimes this imprecision that gets you in trouble, just not being as precise as you should. And the reality is, whenever I hear somebody say that, something like that when it comes to the Trinity, is I'm almost always 1,000 times more gracious, because I know for a fact that if I ask people Trinity questions in most churches, they're going to give me modalistic answers.
Yeah.
They're going to give me almost polytheism, depending on who you talk to. I'm like, nope, they don't know how to articulate that. That's actually why we recently did a whole mission trip to Salt Lake City with my students. One of the first things we did is had a whole lesson on the Trinity, how to articulate it, what not to say, and what to say. And that was just fun because the kids were like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. I'm like, okay, good. So it's just a lot of people are kind of ignorant on that stuff. So they shouldn't be. But I mean, also, it just is a reality. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can recognize that, yes, we need to be more precise on that, but then also, okay, it doesn't mean he's a heretic. Yeah. It doesn't mean he's a heretic that needs to be condemned. He's someone who probably just needs to be educated.
But that goes back into the other thing in discussion. Like, there's times where simply years ago we said something. It might be a year later that we realize what we said was wrong or inappropriate or whatever. We don't necessarily want to bring that all to light again, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's where, there's definitely some things like I preached. It's funny, I found some old sermons of mine a while ago, and I was like, whew, God bless those people for putting up with that. That was just, that was rough. I'm embarrassed. But somebody said, hey, Will Hess said this and this and this. I would go, yeah, I said it. Not proud of it, and I, actually rescind that, or I totally disagree with myself. I regularly say that 24-year-old me would look at 34-year-old me as a heretic, but that's because I didn't know what I knew at 24 that I know at 34.
Absolutely, and I guess one thing that goes with that too is, how much time should we really be dedicating to consuming content of slamming pastors if we know, like, hey, I already wasn't listening to that person to begin with?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just, generally speaking, so one of the things with the church split is I started off covering a lot of like abuse too, because that could cause church splits. So I covered a lot of abuse, but even since then, I've stopped covering scandals over the years. I barely cover them anymore. I cover it once in a great while. And the reason why is just because I'm like, man, you can only handle so much negativity. It can make you super cynical.
Yeah.
Because every single time you hear it, and when you look at the stats, I mean, the stats bear out, because you'll hear, the churches are dangerous for kids because of abuse or whatever.
Yeah.
But then it's like public schools actually abuse kids more. But ironically, you don't see that in the news nearly as often as you see whenever a pastor fails. And statistically speaking, it's actually pretty low across ministries. So with all that in mind, it's something to keep, careful how much content you consume on that. Sometimes it's just not worth it, or just wait till more data comes out and then read it when actual information, not just hot gossip, is out, because sometimes it's just hot gossip.
Yeah, because we kind of fall into that trap of the algorithm, because negativity, it just sells. Debates sell. That's why, like, on this podcast, if I was to frame something as a debate just through the thumbnail instead of like a conversation, it wouldn't do as good. Like, my best video on this channel was one that was Baptist pastor versus Catholic priest.
Oh, that's funny.
If I would have phrased it as Baptist pastor has a conversation with a Catholic priest about Catholicism, which one's going to do better?
Oh yeah, no, definitely the other one. Yes, people love that.
Yeah, and it's just part of the algorithm. It wants to kind of push negativity and combat, because that's what gets engagement.
And to be fair, like, we are victim. So one, everyone's a victim of the algorithm, but the other thing is, like, we click on stuff that are more like that. I've actually expressed my frustration to my own subscribers, because I'm like, it's frustrating that whenever I cover something that I feel like is more wholesome or that I feel is more encouraging, I will get less engagement every time. Yeah. And it's frustrating because I'm like, I don't always want to be the guy who's always just dunk, beat up things. I'm like, I can do that. And I very much have the personality that kind of enjoys it. But at the same time, like, that can be a good thing in the right context. But sometimes we need to broaden that. So get out of your echo chamber.
And
I say it all the time.
And that can bleed into the American pulpits as well.
Yeah.
That we become reactionary and negative, and so we're always slam dunking on something or some sin, even if it isn't relevant to our churches.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why, again, keeping the fact that you're a victim of the algorithm in mind, but also always keeping your discernment on. Like, I listen to a lot of people from all sorts of stuff, and all the time. If I'm in the car, I probably have a podcast or a YouTube video playing in the background, just listening to what other people's takes are. And I listen to atheists, leftists, far right nationalists. I listen to all of it. I'm constantly, and I'm listening, but I'm trying to keep my discernment glasses on the entire time because I can't just go by what someone else says. So I'm constantly trying to practice what I preach by escape my echo chamber by listening to a diversity of views. And does it mean do I still have my biases? Absolutely. We all do. That's part of the honesty. It's like, I have my biases, but that doesn't mean that I should straw man or misrepresent others. And then also, when I bring it to, if I preach, is what I'm talking about really what people care about or what is going to impact that mom of 6. So you have to keep everyone in mind. And sometimes you do have to address the stuff that the culture is dealing with. I mean, you do, I think as a church, we have a responsibility to help people navigate those things.
Do you have kids, Will?
I have 2 beautiful little girls, a 5-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old little girl. I do.
Awesome. Well, I was wondering, as someone who's a content creator, youth pastor, and, parent, father of 2, how should we manage our kids' content inflow, even if they're listening to Christian, content creators like ourselves? I
mean, I very much do my best to make sure my kids aren't iPad kids in general. My kid uses an iPad to watch her little videos, but we very much limit it, and we only let her watch things when we're in the room and we can see and hear what's being done.
What's that limit look like?
We allow for about an hour altogether, and so she's Saturdays we might let her have a little bit more depending what we got going on, but generally speaking, it's like, nope, go play with the toys. And so with parents with that, it's also like, as your kid gets older, especially like in youth group age, like middle school, high school, it's good to start helping them broaden it by finding more mild people that you might disagree with, but then unpack it with your kid. Make it part of your dinner conversation. Yeah. Like, don't be weird about it. Don't be like, if you listen to that, that's trash. You should never listen to it. No. Encourage them to listen to something that you disagree with and then unpack it. What's wrong with it? What's right with it? Where do you think they were going with it? But do you think,
I'm just going to be a matter of fact. Do you think a lot of those parents are, I'm not going to say smart enough, but intellectual enough to really even deal with those problems? Let's just say the average conservative household, they get concerned their 13-year-old is listening to Nick Fuentes' show every day on Kick, and they're like, and the kid's like, well, you should discuss it with me. I don't think the average conservative household would really be able to fight against that.
Well, and that's why, again, being a parent is a calling, man. Like, you're called to do something. And so my hot take is, it's hard, but do it. Like, you as a parent are told to shepherd your child. And so you can't shepherd your child if you only isolate for forever. And you can't if you only expose for forever. Either way is bad for them because they're ill-equipped. They're either going to be deceived or they're going to be so ill-equipped with very few weapons to combat the enemy. Then they get out in the real world. And we've all seen it. The super shelter kid becomes a crazy party animal, falls off the deep end. Yep. And it's because they were not given proper tools. And what mom and dad thought was, if I shelter my kid for forever in the most strict way possible, they'll turn out okay. But really what you ended up doing is you ended up not giving them the weapons that they needed. Yeah. So you, as the parent, need to be aware of what they're listening to, what they're watching, and be aware of those philosophies there. Do the studies, listen to the podcast. Like, the amount of screen time people have just doom scrolling, even parents, doom scrolling or Netflix binging. So if you binge 3 episodes of something on Netflix that night, but you haven't done the research on something else that is impacting your child, we have a priorities problem. Yeah. That we don't have. A lot of times with people, it's not a time problem, it's a priorities problem.
What do you think about the rising number of Christian parents and even pastors that are suggesting you shouldn't let your kid be on social media until they're 18 and they can make their decision for themselves?
Giga Chad based. If I can use some Gen Z on that. No, I'm actually, all the data shows that you shouldn't let your kid be on social media till at least 16 because it's really, really damaging to them. YouTube is a little bit more, depending what restrictions you have on it, it can be a little bit more useful.
Is that because you're not creating content, you're just consuming it?
Yes, exactly. You're not putting yourself out there. Like Instagram has a terrible impact on young girls, and it's because you have Instagram models who are brushed up and they're showing half their bodies, objectifying themselves, and then what happens is young girls get on there and they see that, oh my gosh, that girl got 1,000 likes because of course she's airbrushed, got all the or she's just a beautiful young lady. Oh, you don't look as good as her. In this comparison game constantly goes, you post, you get 2 likes, they got 1,000. Well, now what? Well, maybe you're not as valuable, or you're just not as pretty, or maybe you need to show more. These are the things that could happen, or the fact that bullying can become a thing that they deal with on the internet. Like they can't escape it. A lot of Gen Xers, for example, might not understand this. You went to school, you had to deal with a bully, but you got to go home. They don't get to do that because they can be texted, messaged, and everything else. Yeah. So just pull it away from it. They don't need to be on it. I've never heard a parent say, man, I'm really glad I gave my kids social media onto their phone earlier. Like, hold off on it. I know it's not in vogue to do that, but I mean, my daughters, I'm not planning to letting them have a smartphone until minimum, earliest 16, probably later. Like you don't need it. And all the other stuff you can do online, at home, in the living room, don't care. Yeah. And it does actually, and again, Jonathan Haidt, if anyone knows the name, he wrote a great book called The Anxious Generation, talking about Gen Z on down. And it's phenomenal. And all the data shows that the anxiety and depression rates spiked and have continued to spike ever since the smartphone dropped. So my generation, I was in high school as a millennial. And so we see the effects that it does, and there's a lot of reasons for it. And he unpacks it. He's an atheist, and he even recognized that kids in religious communities are doing better at this than others. And also the fact that it causes these issues. And so his whole thing is that you shouldn't be able to have it until you're 16, because you have kids acknowledging to agree to share their data at like 13 years old, which is crazy. Yeah.
I wonder what it's going to be like for your kids, Generation Alpha. People who don't know, Generation Alpha defined as people who grow up their whole lives with smart technology. Yeah. So what's it going to be like for most of those kids who aren't growing up in homes like that, who are just being bashed over the head with content every day of their lives? Yeah.
I mean, and that's where parents are going to have to be very extra vigilant. The church needs to also help equip parents on this. Be the resistance. My generation will never know a world without AI, which is crazy to me. But at the same time, like, that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means you have to adjust. So learn, hey, you can cut these things off. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing. You don't have to keep up with the Joneses. You have to do it just because everyone else does it. Yeah, your kid's going to complain about it, but they won't die. They'll be all right. It's okay to say no. But
they're going to socially die because all their friends are on social media.
Yeah, I mean, all those kids are socially dying anyway because all they're doing is living for clicks. So it's like, no matter, like, they're more connected on social media than ever before, yet more alone and depressed than ever before. So they're already socially dying. Yeah. So understanding that. And then what Jonathan Haidt said, I think he's right on this. Find other families, get other families in your community. That's why going to church is helpful. Get other family members bought into, like, let's actually do life together instead of online. And let's do play dates. Let's get our families together in community and stuff more often. Get our kids to play together more often. Be normal, away from all those things. Go back to the playgrounds. Get other families to buy in on it. That way your kid isn't a social outcast, but also that way you don't have to compromise and put your kid as another socially outcast situation is bad for him.
To follow that logic, why don't we go just full dark ages then?
Like completely remove all of that?
Yeah, like your church has a really great YouTube channel. You have a great YouTube channel. Y'all have a huge Facebook presence, all of that. If this is like the thing where we need less of this, why don't we go full dark ages and get rid of all of it?
All right, let's do it. Done. Legitimately, I would shut down my entire channel and everything if I knew that would actually improve everything. Like if everyone did it and improved it, great.
But if we do that, we're leaving it to the world to basically slaughter everyone.
And that's why I say the internet's the new mission field. So it's all about balance. The internet, even AI, all these are tools, but you can't let those tools be absolute. And so if you let them be absolute in your life and they completely hijack your life, then they're detrimental to you and your family. But if you use them as the tools, as information to use, then you're great. You're sitting real good. And every single family, and all the data pretty much shows us again, is the families that have a more balanced approach, those kids fare far better than those who were completely shut down and those who were given complete like liberal, like no strings attached, reign over it. So proper boundaries, and then find trusted people that your kids can listen to and that they can take seriously, that are good information, but then always encourage them to double check and don't take everything at face value, because content creators make mistakes too. I know, because I've had to issue corrections on things I've said. So yes,
hopefully we won't have to do a single one for this episode.
Hopefully not.
But if you want to listen to more from Will, he has a fantastic channel, The Church Split. A link to it's going to be down below. You may even find this video on a clip that he does on his channel where he exposes me as a false prophet or whatever. But Will, thank you for coming on. Hope to have you on again sometime.
Yeah,
bro.
let's do it.